Hey guys, it's Mike Monty, one half of Long Island's #1 pro wrestling broadcast. And we want to reach out to all the fans out there who have supported our show to say thank you. Thank you for making 2021 one of our best years. And one of our best years was because of Anchor. Anchor, the way that you can have your voice heard. You can be just like us. Record your own podcast. Use the Anchor tools to edit your podcast. Use it on a phone. Use it on your computer. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. And best of all with Anchor, they're totally free. So be just like Long Island's #1 pro wrestling broadcast, Monty and the Pharaoh. We're looking together for a great 2022. We've got huge guests coming on board. Oh, yeah. You're probably wondering why Jimmy's not here right now. Well, he's prepping for one of the best interviews we're about to have, and we're going to surprise someone with. So hang aboard with us, and don't forget, be like us and use Anchor.
Good evening and welcome to Wrestling Rewind. I'm your host, Angel Amoroso, and I am joined by my co-host,
Iron Man Tommy Cairo. How are you, babe?
I'm doing great, Tommy.
How's my girl doing?
Fantastic. I'm feeling great. Good. And I hope you're doing great. And I hope everyone out there is doing great.
I'm doing good. I was going to say I'm busier than a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. But I'm retired, so people might call me out. What are you busy with? A lot of stuff.
Lots and lots of stuff. And tonight we're busy with, we're going to start with a book reading, right?
Yes, we are.
Today, and what you got for us tonight with our book reading?
All about Calgary Stampede, the Hart family. I would say that this is the definitive book on the subject because it's, closely related and done by people right there that came up in that family and around that family and the people that train there. It's just awesome.
So pain and passion.
Yes, after you read this, you're going to start reading other books and you're probably going to put a lot of them down because unless it's historical information like archives, data, wrestlers, areas, it's all the same. They get to the WWE stuff and I'm like, I don't want to even read it anymore. And nobody says anything controversial enough to be better than anybody else because everybody's afraid. If you can't tell all, don't write a book. People said to me, why don't you write a book? I don't want to hurt my family. That's why I would never write a book. Because to write a book, I would have to, for it to be any different than anybody else's, I would have to tell the truth. And to tell the truth, people will be harmed. I can't do it,
Honest hurts.
Yeah. So this is the nitty gritty. If you were ever lucky enough to be trained by, even at the end when it wasn't like it was in the beginning, you didn't have Stu there, but the Hearts were still there carrying on. And some of the later graduates are out there now. So if you're lucky enough to go there and make it, you are probably a success and have been a success in the business for many, many years, unless, certain derailment or some health issues. Most of those graduates all made money in the business.
Yes, they all did very well. Okay. That's one of those memes you could drop around in the business. If you came from that area, you were pretty much guaranteed at least a chance, if not like a full ride. So
and you know what? You didn't have to say anything because if you were coming from there, they already knew it before you got there, which is probably why you were going there in the first place.
Yes.
Okay. Pain and Passion, the history of Stampede Wrestling. Okay. We're going to read right from the beginning because there's a lot of pertinent stuff in here. Acknowledgments. All told, I conducted, now this is the author speaking, Keith McCoy. All told, I conducted close to 60 interviews while researching this book. I also relied heavily on certain organizations and sources. There would be no Pain and Passion without them. I would like to thank the following, members of the Hart family. Another key assist came from Bob Leonard, Stampede Wrestling photographer for over 3 decades. Calgary's Glenbow Museum, a veritable gold mine, which gave me access to its extensive Hart family collection. Special thanks to archivist Tonya Finella. She had a real appreciation for the human element and historic importance of the Stampede Wrestling story, and it was great working with her. See, here's an organization that nothing has to be embellished. Or just tell the story as it happened.
Exactly.
I am also very appreciative for the excellent work of wrestling journalist David Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer newsletter and Greg Oliver of the Slam Wrestling website. The introduction. When I was 11 years old, I wanted to be Dynamite Kid. Even when he was one of the bad guys, committing heinous acts against my other idol, Bret Hart, I secretly worshipped the tough, cocky Englishman who moved with the agility of Spider-Man in the wrestling ring. Me too. In the early 1980s, I watched Stampede Wrestling religiously, glued to the TV every Saturday afternoon in the living room of my Saskatoon home. When the show was over, I'd snatch my little brother and reenact the matches, with him as my crash dummy. Poor kid in the schoolyard. In the schoolyard, my friends and I played Stampede Wrestling at recess, pretending to be the stars of the Calgary-based promotion, imitating the down-home play-by-play plays of announcer Ed Whalen as we hammered on each other. Off those ropes, look out. Nelly, it's a malfunction at the junction. So, well, I should do that right. Off those ropes, look out. Nelly, it's a malfunction at the junction.
There you go.
I relate to this because that was me. I'm sitting on, I'm watching wrestling.
Sure, and all kids, like you've reenacted what they saw, and all kids played wrestling and did the announcer voices and everything, and that's, later became wrestlers.
I used to drag the kids in my neighborhood. They hated it, and when I hit the one kid with a drop kick and his mouth was bleeding, he wanted to stop. I was like, no, keep going.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Let's see where we're at. Okay, I was the runt of my class then, neither good at nor particularly taken with most sports. Comic books were my passion, which never makes one the most popular kid in school. But where wrestling was concerned, I bonded with my classmates. All the boys were hooked on the wild brawls and zany theater meets sports soap opera that the famed Hart family concocted each week. And pro wrestling was perfectly in keeping with my love of comic books. The Hart Boys, Dynamite Kid, Davey Boy Smith, they were like superheroes come to life. Every so often, my dad and my grandpa took me to the Monday night matches, too. This is where you get hooked, right here.
Right. As soon as you see a live event, that does it right there.
And especially there. They weren't doing cartoon character wrestling. This was, crazy, gritty stuff.
It's like that first shot.
Yeah.
You get hooked away.
That's right. It happens to all of us. We can all tell you exactly when it happened, too.
Yeah.
Every so often, my dad and my grandpa took me to the Monday night matches, too. When Stampede Wrestling came to Saskatoon Arena, Grandpa had been watching wrestling since the 1950s, and he was still a big fan. When things got too far out or bloody for Gramps, he would assure me the action was fake. Although he didn't seem to believe that himself, when he'd howl with indignation at the wicked villain's ways. That son of a bitch is cheating. My grandmother used to do that.
My mother used to do that.
Yeah, and my grandpa, they're a bunch of phonies.
Oh, the biggest heckler in the Civic Center. My mother would rip her belt off and swing it at people. It was quite embarrassing. So did I, but I was a child. But quite embarrassing.
That makes the show even better.
It really does.
People were invested, Mm-hmm. It didn't stop him when they called the fake. It didn't seem to believe that himself when he'd howl with indignation at the vows. That son of a bitch was cheating. For several generations on the Canadian prairie, Stu Hart Stampede Wrestling was an institution, a staple of pop culture diet for hundreds of thousands of fans. But the show's influence was far more than just regional. In the late 1980s, it was broadcast across the country. Now, I never got this. Never got it. On TSN, never got this. Over the decades, bootleg tapes of Stampede Wrestling were broadcast in up to 30 countries around the world. Some of the most famous wrestlers of all time emerged from the promotion, from Gene Kiniski and superstar Billy Graham to Bret and Owen Hart, the British Bulldogs, and current superstar Chris Benoit. Wow. From its remote neck of the woods in Western Canada, Stampede Wrestling helped shape the wrestling world into the multi-million-dollar mega industry it is today. And you got to understand, they were in these remote areas that most of this was Inuit or Alaskan natives. What do you call them? Eskimos.
Yeah, right.
These were their reservations that they went out. So you're talking there's nothing going on. It's out in the tundra. Even though the modern mat game has become too flesh over substance for my liking, dominated as it is by Vince McMahon's media colossus, WWE, I'm still a wrestling fan. Wrestling has always had a crude, trashy nature. It's part of the fun, and I don't share the opinion of my legions of critics, including the Hart family, who blast WWE on moral grounds. Yes, McMahon has upped the trash ante with bottom-feeding gimmicks, beer-guzzling and anti-heroes, overt sexual innuendo, and a bevy of half-naked women he tries to pass off as wrestlers. But to me, the spectacle is not that far removed from the typical heavy metal concert, and I love a good heavy metal concert.
Well, you know what? This guy wrote this a while ago, because if he sees what's going on right now, he'd have some different stuff to say. Sorry.
No. Remind me to look and see when this was written. I never thought about that, but when I just read about Benoit, we know it's at least before Benoit.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. I'm sorry, I lost my spot. Even reminding me. All right, I do think the game has lost something special, and I miss the heyday of Stampede Wrestling. There was something so pure about the product. Yes, it was showbiz too. Character-driven with the predetermined matches, of course. Stampede Wrestling was contrived. But not early like WWE is today. WWE has become the wrestling equivalent of the most bloated arena rock concert. It's a slick, larger-than-life dose of maximum big-budget entertainment, but it has also gotten too predictable, over the top of the point of ridiculousness, and far too showy for its own good. WWE is so bogged down by the frills that it has lost its heart. I'll agree with that. I think everybody would.
Yeah.
Step back. Real quick segue. While watching the new NWA that Billy Corrigan has put together, however successful they're going to be, they're not the NWA of old. They're trying, and they brought back the look. They even recreated the TV studio to look like the old building they were in with the flags hanging up, the old NWA logo. Their champion is Trevor Murdoch. You know, he looks just like he was a Murdoch. And it's not.
I really see why it wouldn't work. The money's behind it. There's an experienced person that was at hand for it, who kind of knows what he's doing. So everything's there. It's just about the people that are working along with him, and that's what makes it work. Yeah. You know, that's what's going to make it work. Is everyone working together? Other than that, I can't see it falling flat. It sounds like it's going to be something to take off and maybe be big competition for other companies right now.
At least it's a test if the people will be able to swallow a toned down version. I love that studio thing. I mean, you know, they were taped. A lot of the stuff in Calgary was taped at this big rodeo arena place. So I don't remember seeing any of their TV done in any more than this one similar building, which wasn't huge, but gave you that, you know, up close. Like, those guys couldn't miss punches. They couldn't couldn't sell a phantom kick.
Right.
They would have booed you right out of there.
Sort of like USWA studio, where it was like, you know, literally, if you would fall outside of the ring, there goes a fan right there. No guardrails. It was just TV studios back in the day, and smaller ones, Georgia even, for NWA, Georgia Championship Wrestling. So close that there was no room to fake anything. There was no room to call a match, and because you were right there in front of people. So it gave it a whole different feeling when studio wrestling.
One announcer that I think I forget his name. He's been here forever, but it was so cool because like he tried to give the impression, or probably was true, that he was like close to these guys on the outside, had some kind of relationship. Like, because when they would get crazy out by the desk, he would go, "Come on, Jerry!" You call them by their names, like
Lance Russell.
Lance Russell, or he'd say, "What's his name?" The Elvis impersonator. Come on now, Bill. That's not necessary. Like, he goes out and hangs. He probably did. But I thought that was so cool. Like, he's imploring them as a man-to-man in a business. You have to do this here. Come on now, Jerry.
Right. Great stuff. I love Lance. I was lucky enough to have Lance Russell be part of one of my matches when I was in USWA. So proud of that. Yeah, love Lance Russell.
He was one of the best. That's the kind of wrestling I grew up on and I enjoy. Interviews done by the ring, everything's right there. Like you said, you can't make it.
TV tapings.
Yep, and they were done in the TV studios, so it all had the same feel.
Right, like back when you started in the original ECW, when Todd had it, that was in a bar. That was like the closest crowd the closest drunkest crowd you could get. So there was there was no room for calling anything during the match or anything.
Yeah, you can Chestnut Cabaret. That was one of those places.
And Chestnut Cabaret, yes. Mm-hmm.
Crazy.
Quarters, yeah.
I did a double dog collar chain match with Ivan Koloff, and we both got collar.
Yes, great
there
stuff.
was nothing leading up to it. It was just like, why are we having a double dog collar chain match?
Yeah, because we feel like seeing it. That's why.
I did the best I could, and I think it was a pretty good match.
It was great.
Anyway, thank you. It's just, he wants to get the blade out so quick that he's taking it out when he's not supposed to, and he's got it on his head while I'm kicking him in the back of the head, not knowing until I saw the tape way later. I'm like, what are you doing? Like,
Uncle Ivan just wants to get the color right away.
And all those guys are like that. Yeah. It's like the most important thing to them.
It was back in the day, yes.
For some of them, I think that's why they worked.
Yeah, the Southern style culture of the Jim Crockett promotion era and things that came from like UWF era were more of the type to need the color in every match that they had, because that's what was really like the beginning of hardcore. Those guys were bleeding in every match, from the Bushwhackers to the Fantastics, even, and guys that even friggin' Hacksaw Jim Duggan, it's like that. We're bleeding every week back then. It was about like being real and being able to.
It made it more of a spectacle, right?
Yeah. A lot more.
You remember when we were first, watching? When I first started watching wrestling, I went to the magazine rack. 12 magazines at least every month, and 10 of them had bloody images. And that, to me, I don't know what that was. It was so like. Look at that
attractive.
Yeah, his eyes wide open, and the blood. It's like such a spectacle,
Right. Between Abdullah the Butcher, I think, and Carlos Colon were probably like they were always the back of the magazine where it was like tons of blood. That
what's funny, Carlos, you couldn't see it. You couldn't see the blood. It's too dark.
Unbelievable. It was something bled, like unbelievable.
He went both ways though and cubed it.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Sorry. Hold on.
It's amazing he didn't strike an artery as many times.
I think he just probably made the blade to go deeper and deeper as he wasn't cutting himself anymore because of the scar tissue. So he probably never got to go that deep because he probably didn't start out real deep.
Yeah, but good stuff. There's something that attracts all of us to. It's not all of us. It's a certain percentage of us that when we start watching wrestling, that blood is something that just kind of tops it off for us in having an interest in getting involved in it, and then wanting to do that ourselves. It's the influences that
you explained it. I'm sorry, you explained it right there, because I'll tell you what it is. First of all, it's a little bit of a badge of honor. If your head, not like you did it just to get, extra scars, but if in the course of doing so you had some that showed, it was like a badge of honor. Like when the doctor told me my ears are starting to flatten at the beginning of cauliflower ear, I was like, why can't I get a full blown case of it? You know what I mean? Like, so I think that's part of it.
I was actually told that my scars, this is a badge of honor to you, and this is what makes you, because I was one of the first girls in the United States here to bleed so much. Oh, I bled, all right, and I bled everywhere I was. So
poor Tommy Dreamer had to make a blade because he tried 5 times, and each time he wasn't able to cut himself.
Well, Kevin Sullivan and Abdullah the Butcher made my blade for me. So I had to just make my blade. And, it turned out very well for everyone. But, I think...
Tony Stetson taught me. And he taught me with a number 15 surgical blade.
There you go.
Once you learn that way, I did plenty, and they're gone.
Nice and thin, you know.
And Neosporin right after it.
Close like glue. Neosporin is like glue for them afterwards. A lot of people don't know that. They do these death matches and they're like slicing themselves up. They don't know that they could do it easy and not be scarred up later.
Have it on you during the match.
But if you want your badge of honor at the end of your career of having a scarred up face and that's your thing, then no one can remove, you know, that want and that need. I totally get it.
It reminds me of a picture of Johnny Weaver, who was a big name down south in the 70s, 60s, 70s. And he's got a law enforcement, like a sheriff's uniform and badge, and his head is sliced. You can see it like what? Like what? If people that don't know, they must be fixated on his head. Like,
yeah, like, what did you go through a meat slicer here?
Yeah. You know, there's not much life out there in the working world when you look like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
I guess if you're a tattoo artist or something.
Right.
Anyway, all right. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go to the mutiny and sinking of Stampede Wrestling. So they're starting right at that juncture. That's the beginning of the book.
Great.
It was Lord of the Flies on steroids. But unlike little boys with spears stranded on a desert island, this scene featured overgrown hulks, Stampede wrestlers armed with crushing muscle power and driven wild by the scent of blood like a school of sharks, as in the classic novel. They had turned on one of their own. Bruce Hart, 39, son of famed wrestling promoter Stu Hart, looked out on the lynch mob surrounding the vehicle on which he had locked himself for safety. There was no talking his way out of this jam. He felt a sharp, throbbing ache in his freshly busted jaw. Outside the van, which earlier that day had hauled the mob to this arena parking lot in Yellowknife or Hay River, depending on who recalls the incident, the wrestlers circled hungrily. The wildest of the lot were stoked on steroids, booze, and various drugs, from painkillers to cocaine. Oh, my God.
At least they're telling the truth.
Yeah. They hammered on the windows, kicking and violently rocking the vehicle, taunting their prey, challenging him to come out and play. Bruce, paralyzed with fear, next to his panicked assistant, the hapless Bob Johnson, a family friend and wrestling Klingon, knew he was in for one mother of a beating. As the booker and boss's son, he was the acting chief on this wrestling tour, but there was no way he was going to step out of the van. He had been around wrestlers all his life, and he knew full well he was past the point of restoring order. Now, I worked with Bruce.
Smart guy.
In New York.
Yes, yeah. we worked with Bruce for Falcus. Was
Falcus.
it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I did some stuff with him, Marty Jannetty, and I worked with Tatanka was involved in that, and also Jim Neidhart.
Yes.
So, okay, this is, I can see the whole thing, right? These goons had traveled over 1,000 miles, coming from Calgary. For a good portion of the trip, 18 of them had been packed like gigantic slabs of beef in one van with no air conditioning in the sweltering summer heat. It was a nightmare for everybody involved. Bruce thought, but at the moment there was nothing to be done about it. Instead of trying to make the best of a bad situation, those bastards were lashing out, looking for someone to blame. He couldn't believe things had descended into such ugliness, into this cheap hell ride to the middle of nowhere, where the freaks had taken over the circus. His father's Calgary-based wrestling promotion, Stampede Wrestling, had been a Western Canadian institution since 1948, 41 years ago, as of this book. The television show had been syndicated across North America, and thanks to bootleg tapes, had been seen in as many as 30 countries. Wrestling fans from around the globe knew about Stampede Wrestling. It had spawned some of the biggest wrestling stars in the world. Bruce's own brother, Bret Hart, was one of them. Famed British Bulldogs Dynamite Kid and Davey Boy Smith, former tag team champions of the world, with another two. Ironically, it was the Bulldogs leading this mutiny. Such was the wrestling business that you could be on top one day, a face on network TV, a main event star, in the biggest arenas in the world, and the next day we were back in the shithouse, trudging along on tours like this one. In a matter of months, the Bulldogs had gone from first-class flights to this garbage run to the Northwest Territories, and they weren't happy about it. So, you know, that's prime territory. Yeah. Tom Billington, Dynamite Kid, was at the forefront of the attack. He was volatile, malicious, the loosest cannon of the bunch. Billington was seconded by his steroid-raging cousin, the 245-pound Davy Boy Smith. It's not clear who rounded out the mob that descended on the van, though the Stampede roster at the time, including a young Chris Benoit, who is today one of the biggest stars, the Angel of Death, Larry Cameron, Johnny Smith, Ron Ritchie, and Goldie Rogers. Some of them may have looked on in horror, helpless as the scene unfolded. Bruce believes some of the wrestlers were sympathetic to his plight, but they weren't willing to chance becoming targets themselves. Usually the gang would pick on whoever was the weak one in the herd, and all the hyenas would jump on him and start ripping at him, tearing him apart until he snapped and cracked. Remembers Benoit of his early days on the road as a Stampede wrestler. Dynamite knocked threateningly on the driver's window and demanded Bruce roll it down. He looked scared to death. Billington recalls in his autobiography, Pure Dynamite. Bruce had good reason to be petrified. It was only a matter of time before the bloodthirsty Dynamite Kid came crashing through the class. It never happened. Someone had called the police. Bruce welcomed the shrill whine of the sirens that pierced the night. They told Dynamite to cool it, and he started threatening them, Bruce says. He told them to fuck off. He was drunk, disorderly, stoned. He was almost trying to lead a riot against the police. As the Royal Canadian Mounted Police restrained Dynamite, Bruce and Johnson got out of the van and headed for the hospital. Where Bruce's jaw was wired shut. That was a trip to remember, Bruce says bitterly, kind of like the Titanic. I mean, can you imagine? I was in a car with four guys, a big Lincoln, me, cousin Luke, Jerry Briscoe, whatever his, I can't remember, Jerry Briscoe, not Jerry, kid in New Jersey that used his name. I'm not sure who else. A couple different trips with different people. And I remember being in Maryland coming back from South Carolina and thinking, is this ever going to end? I was having an anxiety attack in the back seat. And I said, Luke, I got to come up front. Pulled right over where I was in front. I got in front. Because when you sit next to Luke, you have to navigate. You have to roll a joint every hour. You got to be on. You can't nod. You can't sleep. Nothing. You know.
Right.
Well, I can imagine. You could tell it must have been brutal.
Yeah, this is.
What fueled this ugly mutiny? What caused these men to lash out so violently against the boss's son? The answer is impossible to grasp without a taste of the filth these wrestlers wallowed in on their journey. The Stampede wrestling circuit had always been a harsh road. For over 4 decades, the revolving door roster would do the loop week after never-ending week. There was the Friday night show in Calgary for the TV taping. That's where they taped it. Then it was off to Edmonton, Saskatoon, Regina, Lethbridge, Red Deer, one night after another. Sleazy motel to sleazy motel, and then back to Calgary to do it all again. Somehow they would squeeze in the smaller centers too: Tabor, Swift, Current, Milk River, Tisdale, various Indian reservations. Any gopher hole across the prairies would do. Wherever paying, screaming, fist-shaking wrestling fans were to be found. Canceling shows was not an option. There could be a blinding blizzard. The roads could be glare ice. The junkie band could be falling apart on the highway. It didn't matter. You made the shows or you weren't paid. And every few months, the loop veered out, touching down in centers across British Columbia and Manitoba, the Northern Territories, Alaska, Montana, Washington. They were hit as well at one time or another. During the late 1980s, Stampede Wrestling was broadcast across Canada on TSN, the sports network, and the Hearts decided to take advantage of that, increasingly venturing outside the regular Saskatchewan-Alberta loop. That's why in the summer of 1989, Bruce had booked this cursed trip to the Northwest Territories. Also similar to this was Tony Kazana ran up in Canada, and they called it the Death Tour. So it was very reminiscent. Long rides, 12, 15, 18 hours in a van with bald tires on icy roads. Oh my God.
I think we've all been through bad road trips. So
yeah, I think every one of those was bad.
Yeah.
And every few months, Luke veered out, touching Alaska. Myland Elzian, who was performing as the evil Arab wrestling manager Abu Wizal, had missed this particular week, but he knows exactly what had happened and why.
I got you now.
Got to get back in the groove. Oh my God! You know what it is? It's getting caught on. Hold on. We apologize.
That's okay. A lot of stuff happens. We're rolling up on about 30 minutes.
All right, so I'll find a spot that we can leave it at.
Okay. Or that we could like wrap it up with like one last story, and then we'll get into part 2. Okay.
The Stampede Wrestling Circuit had always been a harsh road for over 4 decades. I'll go down here. Every few months, the Luke veered out. We did that. We did Abdul Wizal. Do you remember him? He was a little skinny guy that was dressed like the Grand Wizard.
Yes, yes.
No one remembers how many towns were hit or how many days they had been on the road, but everyone remembers the trip as one long, foul ordeal. At first, there had been 2 vans. The villains or heels generally rode together. So-called good guys traveled in a babyface van. Some of the seats were torn and broken, wobbling in their bases. There were holes in the floor in one van. The liner had been ripped from the ceiling. The cabs reeked with the rotten smell of body odor, sweat, stale beer, cigarettes. The odd belch or fart fired into the mix for comedic relief. Somebody had also pissed in the back of one of the wagons.
Great.
So we're going to leave this until the second episode.
Those stories were very graphic, and we're going to cut this off, and we're going to have a part 2 of this reading, because we want to get back to these stories about Calgary and Stampede Wrestling and the Hearts. Very interesting stories that maybe you haven't heard and maybe you want to hear. So join myself and the Iron Man Tommy Cairo back next week for a book reading on Wrestling Archives, Wrestling Rewind, on Monty and the Pharaoh, and join us every Sunday at 7 p.m. here on Monty and Pharaoh's YouTube for myself and my co-host Iron Man Tommy Cairo. He's dropping a
stop using my hands.
For myself and my co-host, the Iron Man Tommy Cairo. Thanks for joining us. Join us again next week, where we will have another book reading, part 2 of Stampede Wrestling. So join us then. And until then, have a nice night and a nice life. Good night.